All right, so this is the last bit of notes for evolution part one. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this up out of the way. So evolution part one, so far we've really studied Darwin, his voyage to the Galapagos Islands. Yesterday we covered what Darwin did when he returned to England. And kind of after 1859, once he publishes his book, Darwin never stops working. Okay, so Darwin really kind of launches this idea of biogeography. Okay, so biogeography is the study of organisms from around the world. Bio meaning life, geography meaning the globe or around the world. So, what Darwin kind of points out is that on the different islands that he visited, or even Australia versus South America, there were organisms that had similar characteristics, um, even if they were completely across the globe. So we can look at these different animals here. They all have kind of similar characteristics, but I want to focus on the raccoon found in North America and the red panda found elsewhere. Okay, so if we look, they both have this tail, they're both four legged creatures. Darwin points out at this time in the 1850s that these organisms were probably related at some point in history. Okay, and Darwin kind of points out that there's three different functions or three different structures that he can find out with these fossils. Okay, so one of these is what he calls homologous structures. Homo means same. So if we say that something has a homologous structure, it means that something has the same structure, but they use it differently. If I look at the bones found in a human's arm, they are the exact same bones found in a cat's leg, the exact same bones found in a whale's fin, and the exact same bones found in a bat's wing. Okay? So these homologous structures, they're the same structures, but we don't use them the same as a cat would use their legs, or a whale would use their fins, or a bat uses their wings. As amazing as it would be for us to fly by just flapping our arms fast enough, we're not a bat. Okay? There is a difference in size of these bones as well. If we look, these are all not drawn to scale. They're drawn to be very similar in size, but a cat's legs are not as long or as big as a human's arm. Human's arm, nowhere close to the size of a whale. Okay, so they are the same structure, as in they all have a humerus. However, they're all built differently, and because of that different build, it allows them to function differently. Okay, so a term that I've used before is structure equals function. Our human arms are built the way that they are so that the arms work the way that they do. If we had human arms that looked more like this, the whale, we wouldn't be able to do some of the functions with our arms. We're really going to hit on this more with genetics and cells next semester, but just want to give you a prelude to this expression, structure equals function. All right. Darwin also pointed out that we have analogous structures. Okay, analogous means different. So we have the same structure, right? These are both wings, but they're used differently, or they have a different origin. Okay, so butterfly wings and bat wings, we can say it's probably safe to assume that butterflies and bats have a different ancestor. Okay. Just like Darwin pointed out on his voyage that sharks and dolphins look very similar, they act very similar, but they probably aren't from the same ancestor because sharks are fish and dolphins are mammals. Okay, and then last but not least, this one comes out more after Darwin because Darwin didn't necessarily have examples of this, but vestigial structures, okay? Vestigial loosely translates to the word useless. So these structures are useless in the species that they're found in. Okay, whales have a pelvis bone. Whales don't have legs, so why do they need a pelvis where legs would attach? Ostriches have wings. Ostriches don't fly, so why do they need wings? They run very fast. Okay, humans, we have tonsils or wisdom teeth. We don't use them. Humans also have an appendix. Okay, we don't use those, but it's believed that those organs or those parts, those structures, were used by our ancestors. So, how can we compare the species that we see today to the fossils of the past? Okay, so Darwin kind of explores this in paleontology, so the study of fossils. So, if you've ever watched Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, they really hit on this paleontology aspect. just for the fact that we're digging up bones to look and see what the ancestors look like based on their bone structure. And then we can compare that skeleton to the skeletons we see on Earth today. Okay, so the theory of whale evolution, you can see that whales, according to this theory, started off as these land mammals. Okay, and throughout their evolutionary history, they evolved or changed into these larger water-bound organisms. Okay, so this idea explains why the whales have a pelvis. If they originally came from land where they had to have back legs, we have a pelvis. Okay, so you can look this up on your own if you want to explore it in more depth. But the idea here is that throughout Earth's history, these organisms have changed to their environment. Okay, it didn't happen overnight. Remember, we talked about those adaptations because being able to swim faster was a better evolutionary advantage at the time. Organisms that could swim faster lived longer, grew bigger, and thus the whale was born. Okay, again, if you want to research that more on your own, you can. All right, so how can we prove it? How can we support this theory that whales originally were found on land or any other species like the finches? How can we support that other than just by looking at the fossils? Okay, so one of the big things is a DNA sequence analysis. Okay, so we take DNA from the bone marrow and we compare the DNA. If you shared similar DNA, you are related. Okay, the closer those DNA strands are, the closer you are related to that. Okay, if you've ever watched Jerry Springer, if you've ever watched Maury, when they do the paternity test, right, they compare the DNA from the mom, the dad, and the baby, and they see how closely related that DNA is to the dad. If they're similar, that means that that person is the dad. If they're different, that means obviously they're not the father. Okay, so that one's kind of a very, very straightforward test. The issue is that not all bone marrow survives to today. So that bone marrow, the DNA inside of it can die, and it makes it very difficult. DNA sequence analysis is very, very good for determining if they're related, but not always an option. I apologize. All right, pseudogenes. These false genes are found on all DNA. So every single organism has specific pseudogenes. Pseudo means false. Okay, so we actually have genes in our body that don't code for anything. And that makes humans unique. Okay, because we have specific genes that don't code for anything. Lions have specific genes that don't code for anything, and scientists have been able to find those genes and label those genes. So if we find a specimen and we're not sure who it is, we can look to see if they have this specific sequence of genes. If they do, then they're more closely related to whatever species we're talking about. Okay. We also have these genes called homeobox genes. Homeobox genes control the specific development of a specific structure. So we have a homeobox gene that gives us our Adam's apple, or we have a homeobox gene that makes us bipedal, walking on two legs. And scientists can look at those genes and say, okay, they have these genes. That must mean that they're in this category. So if we're looking at the fact that we're bipedal, we only develop two legs, we can pull that gene out and say, okay, this organism has this gene. That must mean that they were bipedal as well. All right, and then last but not least, this is kind of the loosest translation or the easiest way to do it, but a lot of organisms have these different proteins. Okay, so a protein comparison is like comparing a fingerprint or a footprint. Okay, I know that a fingerprint sounds like a really good thing, and it can be if it's a really detailed fingerprint. But think of this as more like a smudge. Everybody has proteins. Every organism has proteins, okay? And those proteins are very, very similar. We can look and we can say, okay, it's probably an animal because it has the proteins that an animal would have. Okay, it's kind of like looking at a footprint. Everybody not everyone, sorry, most people have between a size 8 and a size 12 shoe. Okay. If we have everybody stand up and take off their shoes and then randomly shuffle them up, you could possibly find another shoe that's the same size as yours, but it's not your shoe. Okay, and that's why protein comparisons are really good, because we can say, okay, they're probably related because they fit into this category of having this protein, but we can't specifically say that is their DNA, that is their protein, because it could be someone else's, in this case, shoe, right? So protein comparison is really good aspect, but if we want to 100% identify how closely related something is, DNA sequence analysis is the best. Okay. All right. That's it for evolution part 1. So where are we going from here? We are going to do in class this island biogeography assignment. Okay. So you can look at this on your own. I'll let you guys pull that up. But if you have any questions about what that looks like, just let me know. If you don't, have a great day.